Okay, we are on. We're live now.
All right, everybody ready? Being 6:30, I'd like to call this meeting, public hearing to order. There are two fire exits, one out the door to the left, the other one out the door to the right, and there's a defibrillator directly across the hall if there is such a need for that. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Robot.
Here.
Mail. Here. Boko. Here. Yeager.
Here.
Roz.
Excuse. All right, I'd like to open a public hearing up to consider new Singular Wireless PCS LLCs for a special use permit application for a new 144-foot wireless communication facility located at 100 Moscow Road, Hamlin, New York. SBL number 006.02-1-4. We'd like to, if anybody's got a comment to make, please state your name and address. Please keep your comments address them directly to the board and keep them within 3 minutes. Is there any, would you like to give your presentation?
Yes, please. Should I keep this within 3 minutes, or is the applicant going to get a little? Doesn't hurt to ask. Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Fitzgerald. I'm an attorney with Phillips Lytle here today on behalf of the applicant, New Singular Wireless PCS LLC, better known to everyone here probably as AT&T. So I plan on starting with a just quick summary of the site and the application, briefly touch on the history of the application for the benefit of the board as well as members of the public who are here today, and finally finish off with what the request of the town board is here as the entity with the approval authority over the site. So the summary of the site, it is at 100 Moscow Road. It is set back from the corner of Moscow Road and Lake Road East Fork. We are proposing a 140-foot monopole with a lightning rod that extends up to 144 feet. We're proposing 6 panel antennas as well as ground equipment, including a concrete pad with equipment shelter, along with a backup diesel generator. The proposed facility is all housed within an 80-foot by 80-foot fenced-in compound, which is a fence topped with barbed wire surrounded by landscaping. And the fence is 8 feet high. In terms of the history of the application, as the town board is likely familiar, in August of 2014, AT&T originally applied for a substantially identical facility, which was approved in January of 2015. The town board at the time issued the special use permit and issued a negative declaration under seeker, finding that there was no risk of a significant adverse environmental impact. Here, the proposed facility that is proposed today is again substantially identical to that facility, and we submitted as again appropriate for the town board to issue the special use permit. We've worked with the town's outside wireless consultant, the Center for Municipal Solutions, since the time of our newest application, and I understand that Sue Marino from CMS is here today to answer any questions the board may have. In terms of the application that's currently before the board, the shot clock, which is the federally regulated time frame for the town to issue all approvals for the application, was extended by mutual agreement between the town board and AT&T and would run, if not extended again, on March 21st, 2022. And I'll touch on that briefly at the conclusion of my presentation. Just to briefly summarize the town board's jurisdiction and what the request of the town board is here, because the town board previously issued a negative declaration under seeker, all we're asking the town board here to do today is to resolve not to rescind the previously issued negative declaration. Because nothing about the project has substantially changed, it's appropriate that the town board do this, and the substantial record before the town board is sufficient to demonstrate that. We've submitted a full environmental assessment form, new and improved from the one that was previously reviewed, visual analysis, as well as our entire NEPA screening, which is, of course, the National Environmental Protection Act, which is the environmental review that's undertaken pursuant to AT&T's FCC licensing. So once seeker is taken care of, then the special use permit is the approval for the site. Again, there's a substantial record addressing consistency with the town code's requirements. The town code goals of siting in a new wireless communications facility in the residential very low density district is achieved. It's the second classification on the zoning priority list, which is granted only by the town-owned property, of which there are no available sites suitable for this facility. From an aesthetics perspective, the facility is set back quite far, as shown on this map over here. Set back from all residences by a substantial amount, set back from roads by a substantial amount. It's set back very far into the property, and there's substantial tree line surrounding the property, which would provide additional screening from neighboring residences. So the request of the town board is the issuance of a special use permit, and we have requested 3 waivers from the town code requirements, and I'll just quickly touch on those. One is a height waiver. The town code says 140 feet. We are proposing 144 feet. Again, those 4 feet consist solely of the lightning rod that we're proposing to add on. So the monopole itself, the part that would actually be most visually impactful, it goes up to 140 feet, and then just to comply with building code requirements, we've got a lightning rod on top. In addition, this is the same height that was previously approved in 2015, so no real substantial change there. The other waiver we are requesting is that the town code requires, absent a waiver, that a new monopole design or a new structure design of any type be designed to accommodate 5 additional commercial carriers. What we would propose is to accommodate 2 additional commercial carriers, with the understanding that should a 3rd or 4th carrier come along in the future, they would be able to modify the facility. It would just require structural modifications to the facility. Anything else wouldn't be commercially practical or reasonable here, where we have not been approached by anyone seeking to co-locate or to join in on this application. But in the event 2 parties come forward in the future, they will of course be able to co-locate. And in the unlikely event that a 3rd carrier would come along, they could again make application to the town board for a modification to the existing structure to house their facility. Lastly, the final waiver that we've requested is typically barbed wire fencing is not permitted except, as I understand it, in the agricultural district. Here we're proposing it because AT&T has experienced a rash of break-ins to its compounds in other locations in upstate and western New York. So the thought here is we are proposing barbed wire, but from an aesthetic standpoint, we're also proposing to screen the barbed wire fencing as shown in our drawings with landscaping, which is taller than the fence itself. So from a visual perspective, there won't be any significant adverse visual impact, even ignoring the substantial setback that is proposed from the streets and neighboring properties. And again, it's a security concern for AT&T. If AT&T's site goes offline, that presents a problem for some first responders who may rely upon the first responder network authority that AT&T is also deploying here, as detailed in our papers. That is the federally mandated communication system, which all 50 states have signed on to, which AT&T is the sole provider of. It's the sole entity that's responsible for deploying that network. So that's why the security of AT&T's site is of such paramount concern to AT&T, among the other obvious reasons. Finally, we requested several timing waivers, just certain pieces of documentation that we requested the ability to hold off until after a special use permit is issued, if issued by the town board. That would be things such as the structural analysis, the foundation design, things like that, which if a special use permit is issued, we would submit to the building inspector prior to the issuance of the building permit. And the reason for that, just practically speaking, is the carriers, when they go through the zoning process, in order to order the tower, which is literally what you would have to do, you have to go through and order all of the specific documentation. Very time consuming, very expensive. Easier to take any feedback from the town, incorporate that into what's ultimately ordered, and then have the town building inspector ultimately review it prior to the issuance of the building permit. So that's what we've requested here. Just to quickly touch on the federal law side of things. Federal law makes it clear that it's an effective prohibition of service to deny any application where an applicant shows a gap in coverage, that the proposed facility meets a gap, and that it is the least intrusive means of doing so. The RF material submitted to date, as well as what was submitted in 2015, shows that there's a significant gap in coverage in the vicinity of the site, that the proposed facility will meet that gap and remedy it. And lastly, considering the alternatives that were considered, that were all documented in our papers, this is the least intrusive means of remedying that gap. So I'll just finish with coming back to the shot clock point. Shot clock, generally speaking, gives the town 150 days to process an application such as this, subject to tolling. The application has had some tolling. It has had an agreement of the shot clock by mutual consent between AT&T and the town board. And assuming all goes well here today and that a special use permit is issued, we would of course be happy to discuss a further extension of the shot clock to give the building department time to process a building permit issuance. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the town board may have.
Where would the access road be?
Sure, so the access road would run from the tower directly east. So I chose this drawing because it gives you the best idea of the site in relation to neighboring properties, but it's right here. It would run directly east here into the north-south road running there.
So it comes out onto East Fork?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it comes out on East Fork.
I guess one of the other questions I have is, so we visited this in 2015, what's been going on since then until now that this project hasn't?
Sure, so in short, I don't have the background as far as why it was never constructed initially. I know the intention was when we came back to the town, so to speak, the hope was that it would just be a renewal of an existing permit. Obviously, the town informed AT&T, well, actually that permit has expired, you have to go through a full zoning process again. I unfortunately don't have a quick answer. I wasn't involved in the initial application, so I don't know the history there.
Do you have a timeline now of?
In terms of construction, I'll look to the site acquisition consultant for the site, Mark Fuentes. Mark, do you know roughly the construction timeline here?
It takes 10 to 12 weeks to get a tower. It could be longer now with supply issues. You know, from the time we get a permit, it could be 3 months to 4 months before construction starts. Better if you get it done before winter.
You said the tree line, is the tree line already existing?
There is just the existing site tree line, yes, just surrounding the farmland. However, we would also be proposing landscaping that's depicted in the drawings immediately surrounding the fence. So that would obscure the fence from view, so you wouldn't really notice the barbed wire portion. It wouldn't go so far as to obscure the entire monopole, but when you look at the visual analysis, what you see is either you're not really going to see the monopole, or it's more or less indistinguishable from existing utility poles if you're just driving down the road.
But it doesn't have any of those, I've seen cell towers that are, you know, have that weird looking, supposed to look like a tree effect to it.
It is not a monopine or a monopalm, no, which is so monopalms you're not going to see around here. But what you will see around here are the monopines, are called, the ones that are designed to look like fake pine trees, which can make sense when they're surrounded by other trees of similar height. Here, we did not go with that design just because it wouldn't make any sense. It would stick out like a sore thumb. So we went with the monopole design as the least visually intrusive. We didn't do, for example, a lattice tower, like a giant power line tower. We didn't go that route. We didn't go a guide tower, which would have the lines running off of it. We went with the least impactful structure that we could build that would give us the height needed to provide the service.
So you said that you're proposing this for a gap, to cover a gap in coverage. Do you have the pre-coverage maps and what you hope will be the post-coverage maps?
So those were all included in the, I believe, the August 2021 filing that was submitted along with the site. And those depict the existing coverage, and it breaks it down in great detail, actually, as far as indoor, in-vehicle, outdoor, and all the spectrums within that. But those are part of the record before the town board, yes. I don't have large-scale blow-ups of them, unfortunately, but they are included in the record. They would be attached to the RF justification for the site exhibit to that, I believe, August 2021 filing. All of which has been reviewed by the town's wireless consultant as well, I should add.
And typically, the way I understand it, there's the proposed towers typically accommodate 3 commercial applications, and you've got it proposed as 2.
So the town code,
on that?
Yeah, the town code actually requires 5 additional, so 5 in addition to AT&T. We are proposing to have 2 additional, so us, and then if 2 additional carriers wanted to come along, they could. We think that makes sense from a business standpoint because it's just practical for us. We wouldn't anticipate future carriers. And in addition, we understand that carriers are already deployed on some sites that are relatively nearby to this site, but not close enough to accommodate our needs. So for example, the the Coast Guard tower is nearby, too far away for us. It's a little over 3 miles away, but we know some carriers are already on that and may not want to co-locate on ours. Maybe they would. But if any further ones did come, what we would do is enter into an agreement with them saying, okay, yeah, you can modify our tower that's already existing and approved, but they're going to be doing it at their expense, rather than AT&T taking on all the expense of preparing a tower that's designed and then hope that somebody comes along and wants to sublease space on it. More typical would be we would design it for ourselves, 2 other carriers, and then if any additional carriers come in the future, we would just modify the tower at that time, following approval from the town board.
What modifications would be needed?
It would depend on what kind of loadout would be proposed, whether it's some kind of strengthening of the tower or something done with the foundation. But typically you'd be looking at whether it would be a hardening of the tower itself, or you could have a scenario where they're asking for an extension of the height of the tower, depending on what their needs are. Obviously, we're taking the top part of the tower, so if somebody came along and said, well, we want to go higher, they would need to come to you for that approval, of course. But that's why, in addition, if we design this thing for 5 additional carriers or even 3 additional carriers, we don't know that anyone's going to want to go below us on this tower. There's just no way for us to know, because obviously the carriers don't all collude with each other when they're trying to do this kind of siting and things like that. So we thought that 2 additional carriers, in addition to ourselves, was a reasonable compromise here in light of the goals of the code as well as the realities of the situation in upstate New York in terms of the number of carriers and what we understand the existing carrier situation to be in the town.
And those 2 would be at the same height as you guys?
They would be lower. Typically, you have about 20 feet of separation between antenna sets. That's usually what you'll see on a site like this. So you've got us at, I believe, 136 feet, and then you'd have somebody 20 feet below that, 20 feet below that, just to prevent any kind of interference. You can't get the carrier's antennas too close together, otherwise they interfere with each other.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if any questions should come up following any other additional comments, I'm happy to come back and answer.
I'm going to ask Sue, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sue Marino from the Center for Municipal Solutions, the town's, we're the town's consultant for wireless issues. As Matt has said, I'm sorry, I'm trying to call you Pat. As Matt has said, they have proven a need for a facility. When we reviewed the, sorry, I'm totally drawing a blank here. When we reviewed all the documents as far as coverage, as their gap as well as capacity, they have proven a need for it. There were no other facilities close enough that would accommodate and fill that gap. So we do agree that there should be a new facility. I won't go over the waivers, he covered that, except for the one waiver. As far as the additional carriers, as he said, that your law currently says 5 additional carriers, so that would be AT&T plus 5, total of 6. In recent years, different carriers have merged. There aren't that many licenses anymore. We still recommend 3 additional carriers in addition to AT&T. Reason being is, number one, that's what was proposed before, and that was what was approved in 2015. But you've got Verizon, you've got T-Mobile, which recently merged with Sprint. You've got Dish. Sometimes there's emergency services that are looking for space on a tower. So we feel that the 3 additional carriers is still reasonable, but not holding them to the 5 as the law is. So that would be a total of 4 carriers versus they're asking for a total of 3. Our position on that is, if they had to build it stronger later, we haven't seen the soils report, we haven't seen the foundation report yet, again, because of the cost until they get approved. We don't ask for that. But how do we know that it can take something stronger if they build it at one level? So having it strong enough for 3 additional carriers is what we recommend. Again, it's the board's decision. The other, well, I think you all have the letters here as far as our recommendations, but all of these recommendations we would, except for the final post-construction ANSI inspection, we would recommend be done before construction can start. So before any construction starts, all of these conditions should be met. And we would review those and verify that they're meeting the requirements of the code and structural requirements, etc. Is there any specific question that I can address, or I don't want to just repeat everything Matt said?
Yeah, no, is that like repeating the balloon test and stuff, or is that?
We did not ask for the balloon test to be repeated because it was done in 2014. The pictures, we did have them submit the reports and the pictures again, so that this new application is a complete application in itself. But those pictures were available on record here at the town, and they did do the full balloon test in 2014. I was on site for that as well.
Other questions for Sue? Thank you, Sue.
No problem.
Are there any other comments? Anybody in the audience at all?
I have one question, and I don't know if this is proposed in the plans. Did they clarify what level of service they might be considering, and the longevity of it? Is it 5G, is it 4G, is it an extension, and will it have capabilities beyond a period of time, a life cycle?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch all that at this time. I'm gonna open the public hearing, or maybe open to the public. And could you please stand and state your name and address? Thank you.
It's a simple question. Cheryl Kasicki, 7890 Newco Drive. The question is just on the technology, the capability, the longevity that they plan for this. I don't know if that's been determined, if it's been stated, and also if there's a longer longevity than what they're proposing to put out. Is there an extension plan to the design?
Matt?
Yep.
So again, Matt Fitzgerald from Phillips Lytle. So what's proposed on the tower right now is 4G equipment, keeping in mind that even that terminology is a little, loose in terms of what it means, but it's your typical cell tower, what you would expect. It's not what's currently considered 5G. We're not proposing any deployment of that equipment at this time. In terms of how the sites operate, when AT&T looks to find a site, they look for one that's going to be a long-term commitment. And the reason for that is when you build one site, you build all your neighboring sites around that site. So that's why typically these towers are long-term leases of the property. And so the site you'd expect the site once constructed to be here for a while. And along the way, it'll get upgraded as new equipment comes out. So it's tough to say what the next upgrade will be beyond the equipment that's currently proposed. But all of that equipment, whatever it may be at any point in time, is always subject to FCC licensing and regulation, such that we can't go up there and deploy anything that hasn't been thoroughly vetted, for example, from a health and safety standpoint. So currently 4G, whatever the future holds in terms of technology, the site will evolve with the times in terms of its deployment, but it will result in a significant increase in service coverage in the town.
Isn't there like a decommissioning plan for cell towers, much like we have for?
Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to comment?
Vicky Brzezowski, 501 Prim Road. I'm just wondering if their town is currently considering any other sites that are being proposed by other carriers at this point in time that might not take farmland out of the equation, might be in a more friendly location to farmers.
There isn't at this time.
Actually, there is a Verizon application that is still in process on North Hamlin Road, but it's in the woods. It does not use other than the access road, it will not utilize any farm fields. And that's proposed and still in process. We've reviewed one or maybe two submissions at this point, but we haven't heard anything in a few months.
Would that also cover the gaps that AT&T is proposing with this tower?
Well, this would be, that one is Verizon, so it's different carriers, different networks, different frequencies. We did look at the proposed Verizon tower. Was there a co-location option? We did look at this tower. Was there a co-location option? For instance, there's the Verizon tower on Cook Road. We asked them to submit studies, propagation studies, proving that they couldn't go on that tower. So it wasn't just taking their word for it. We reviewed the propagation studies and evaluate technically, can they actually make it work on one of these existing structures? And unfortunately, there were no existing structures for either AT&T at this Moscow Road or the proposed one on North Hamlin. There was no co-location options. We push very hard for co-locations. We make them prove it.
Are there any other questions or comments? All right. At this time, yes. Yep, I request a resolution to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Male,
Yes.
Volkel,
Yes.
Jaeger,
Yes.
Prolet.
Yes. Thank you, everybody.